I think initially, what kept me sober was probably fear. Fear, gave me a little bit of the urgency and immediacy that I needed, fear of dying. I mean,
Mm,
heroin addiction especially is, I've had a lot of friends, lost friends to it. And fentanyl now, just so
mm,
pervasive. I mean, it's even deadlier than heroin. And so I was very afraid of dying. And that's what I think kept me sober at first. And then ultimately, kind of going back to the identity piece of it, I was able to start to see, that core identity, who I was, start to get at least a vague idea of it, and build a new life for myself. And that sort of positive push is what I think has kept me sober after the urgency of the fear, has sort of maybe calmed down a little bit over the years.
Welcome to the podcast Emotional Intelligence, your greatest asset and key to success. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Carlaccio, coming to you from the Greater New Haven, Connecticut area. As an emotional intelligence, or EQ coach, I'm committed to helping people develop both emotional intelligence and mental fitness. That is, you'll come to regard problems as situations that help you learn and grow. EQ is a way of being and doing in the world that enables you to develop and sustain a positive relationship with yourself and others, at home, at work, and everywhere in between. Please subscribe to this podcast and tap the like button so more people can enjoy the benefits of EQ. And now, here's the show. Hello, everybody. This podcast is dedicated to addiction, and this is a serious subject. This is a life and death subject. And my guest and I discuss some things that are very sensitive. And so, this is your trigger warning. If you think this may trigger you into using or into remembering something very painful about addiction, just wanted to let you know that we do get really honest and real in this podcast episode. So, this is your trigger warning. You may want to sit this one out if you feel like it's something that you are not sure you're ready to handle. And there is help, and all of that information will be in the show notes. Thanks. Hello and welcome, everybody. And it is good to be back. And I am excited because I have an awesome guest today. His name is Atticus Canham-Clyne. And yes, you can ask him how he got the name Atticus, and you can find out if it's from To Kill a Mockingbird. So, Atticus, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to
I'm
be
very
here.
glad. Good. I asked Atticus to join us today because Atticus is in recovery from addiction. And I wanted to take a moment to really take some time out to talk about something really serious because when it comes to addiction, it is literally life and death. But before we get into our conversation, let me just tell you a few words about Atticus. Atticus Canham-Clyne is a grateful, in his words, recovering addict from New Haven, Connecticut, and thankful for every day that he can wake up sober and alive. He's fortunate enough to help others in a way that he was helped, working as a recovery coach in his community. In his free time, he likes long walks, reading books, and writing about history, global politics, and philosophy. And let me tell you, he is a very interesting person. I've gotten to know him over the last few months, and our conversations are never dull. He is now working on a novel that is loosely inspired by events in his hometown and his experience with addiction. And you can read some of his work on Substack, and I will include all of this in the show notes, as well as at the Quincy Institute's online magazine, Responsible Statecraft, which has published a couple of his articles on foreign affairs. So thank you. You are kind of an eclectic blend, shall I
Y-
say.
yes.
So tell us a little bit about your journey in addiction and recovery, and then I'll kind of probably break in and talk about how recovery is possible when you want it, but also it's not just a matter of stopping the drugs or the alcohol. It is what you do with how you respond to things in life.
Mm, yeah, very true. So yeah, a little bit about my personal journey. I started as many people do, started drugs and alcohol, getting high, drinking at a pretty young age. And I was introduced to heroin in my teenage years. And that pretty much was pretty much all downhill from there. Heroin and crack cocaine. And so my life was all about drugs for many years, from the time I was very young until my mid 20s. I'm 29 now, almost 30, but for a good chunk of my life, it revolved entirely around drugs. And I was pretty miserable, as you can maybe imagine, because it's not a, it's not a way to live. It saps the vitality and joy out of life. Drug addiction, it's a prison. But it's the type of prison from which there doesn't appear to be any escape much of the time, unfortunately. And so I was stuck in a place where I didn't want to continue living like that, but I couldn't imagine or visualize an alternative type of life. And it took sort of external events to force me to kind of come to a place where I could finally stop. I tried a couple times when I was younger, sort of half-heartedly,
Mm.
and at the behest of my family, or that kind of thing, to stop doing drugs. But for whatever reason, I got to a place where I was just ready, and I couldn't do it on my own. But I had this external sort of push that ultimately got me into recovery
Okay,
eventually.
well, we'll talk about what that is in a moment, but I want to go back to a couple of things that you said. One of them is that you felt like your life was miserable and you felt miserable and there wasn't any joy involved in your life. But as I understand it, and it was the same for me, alcohol is my drug of choice, and I've been sober for a few 24, but it was fun at first. It
Of
was
course,
fun,
yeah.
and I went to parties and I fit in with lots of different people and I wanted to fit in. So part of my consumption had to do with being social and feeling like there was some kind of euphoria. So did it start off as fun and then become not fun?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, if it wasn't fun, I don't think we would do it. I know in my experience, I think was a little like yours in that I part of it was related to social dynamics a little bit. But yeah, it was fun. It was very fun. I remember thinking the first time I got high, I just thought the word like magic. Thought this is
Mm.
like, real life magic. I just wish I could feel this way all the time. And that kind of became my life's mission from that point on. Um, but yeah, it was fun. It was euphoric. And it gave me some certain drugs, alcohol, cocaine, Xanax in particular, made it easier for me to be social. And I always had, I think as many kids do, I always kind of felt like, oh, I'm a little different from everyone, like if I can do this, then I'll be more like everyone else, like it, made me help me to be able to socialize. Of course, the paradoxically, it's like it helps you fit in, but then it also, I don't know, accentuates the difference because you feel kind of like cool and, more interesting because I'm not like these normal people, I'm on drugs.
Yeah.
So it gives you a kind of identity, as well, which I think a lot of, it's a big thing for young people is defining who you are in life, and drugs kind of gave me it by default, that sort of identity. But yeah, it was
Wow.
definitely, yeah. It was fun at first, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. So you said so many awesome things that I want to pick up on. I still want to put on the shelf for a moment this idea of prison, because what came to my
Mm,
mind was a straitjacket, like a small room with no windows, and you're just in a
mm,
straitjacket in that room and there's no escape. But before we go there, you said, you know, having that feeling of, oh my gosh, I fit in, I'm cool, this is fun. And you said something also that resonated with me, that that first time was so awesome, you wanted it again and you wanted it
yes.
again and you wanted it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But then you got hooked, and then it was like, now I have to have it.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that happened pretty fast for me. I mean, I started just with alcohol and marijuana, but even just there, it turned pretty quickly to an everyday thing. I remember actually drawing up a little schedule for myself when I first started. Like, I'll do it on Wednesday and Friday and whatever, and that maybe went on for like a week or two, and then it was pretty much like just gonna do this every day if I can afford
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, but I mean the timeline, I don't know exactly, when it stopped being fun and started being,
Mm-hmm.
a compulsion or whatever you might want to call it. But it happens eventually by inevitably. That's when it
Yeah.
becomes that kind of prison, I think.
Yes, exactly. I think about it as liquid handcuffs or some kind of handcuff. If
Mm,
you need alcohol, it's liquid. If you need Xanax, it's obviously not a liquid, although I guess you could crush it and do something with it with water and
sure.
drink it. But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
handcuffs is the thing that keeps coming to mind because, as you pointed out, you tried a schedule and then the schedule just went right out the window.
Yeah.
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 I think a lot of people who suffer from substance use addiction in whatever form that takes, and it also could be a process addiction like gambling or pornography or shopping or sex. We try to control it and we find we can't. And the
Yeah.
brain has decided, I like what's happening here and I want it again. And then when the brain gets used to it, even when it's bad for us, the addiction has done a number on the brain to the extent that the withdrawals are so bad that we have to have it.
You're right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there are, a lot of factors that keep you in that sort of that state, and that sort of the basic neurochemical ones are very, very strong, especially with something like with heroin or Xanax, benzodiazepines, because, or alcohol, especially, physical withdrawal is very intense. And
Mm-hmm.
as a heroin addict, I mean, it was sort of like a search for money to find, drugs to stop the withdrawal, and then you just try to figure out how to do it again the next day. Um, but yeah, I mean, and I think that sort of the neurochemical, compulsion is entwined with, for me, was, self-loathing and those aspects of identity, like how can I change? This is who I am, and it just keeps you in those handcuffs, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I was thinking while you were talking about that idea of your identity.
Mm,
Who are you? And a lot of times, I think people who have substance use addiction forget who they are. Like there is this core self, there's this core, beautiful, wonderful self that was born into this world. And when you are in your addiction, that's not who you are.
no,
That
yeah.
is just you under the influence of something. But I hear a lot of people refer very negatively to themselves as
Mm,
addicts or as losers or whatever. Or I see even in society, even though we know so much about substance use addiction, we still hear the negative comments and we still get the negative judgments like you're an addict or there's something wrong with you or you're a moral failure.
Right.
And when you layer all of that on top of the person with the addiction, how can you get out from under that?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, unfortunately, despite, the fact that I think it's much more common today to recognize addiction as a disease, there's obviously still, a stigma out there and all these negative implications that go along with the language we use around addiction. Um, but yeah, how do you get out of that? I mean, obviously in terms of the sort of moral model of it, you're a moral failure or whatever,
Right.
they would think it's an act of will, and if you just have a strong enough will, then you can solve your problems that way, you're by yourself. But
Exactly.
unfortunately, I haven't really found that to be the case. I mean, I know people with pretty strong wills who have, been alcoholics and addicts for a long time. But
Hmm.
so how do you get out from under that? I mean, in my case, I got to a point of, I suppose, despair. And I think I was just waiting for something to happen because I didn't have the sort of requisite, I don't know, means within myself to push me over the edge into recovery. But I was waiting for something to happen, and something did happen, and for whatever reason, that was enough for me. And I think initially, what kept me sober was probably fear. Fear, gave me a little bit of the urgency and immediacy that I needed. Fear of dying. I mean, heroin
Mm.
addiction especially is. I've had a lot of friends, lost friends to it. And fentanyl now, just so
Mm.
pervasive. I mean, it's even deadlier than heroin. And so I was very afraid of dying. And that's what I think kept me sober at first. And then ultimately, kind of going back to the identity piece of it, I was able to start to see, that core identity, who I was, start to get at least a vague idea of it, and build a new life for myself. And that sort of positive push is what I think has kept me sober after the urgency of the fear, has sort of maybe calmed down a little bit over the years. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's a tough question. I mean, and one that everybody has to face in addiction is, how do you get out from under it?
Right. And, going back to the willpower thing, you're right. Once your brain is addicted to a substance and it wants it, it needs it, it has to have it, there's no amount of willpower. You are a very smart person, you're very accomplished. I was a high functioning alcoholic and I had a good job and I did a lot of things, but I couldn't stop drinking. And
Right.
I also tried to devise a schedule and make little rules for myself about what I would drink and what I wouldn't drink, and when I would drink and when I wouldn't drink. And none of it worked. Nothing worked. And I had a deep spiritual bottom. You know, I was physically not well, emotionally, I wasn't well. And mentally, I wasn't really well. And spiritually, I felt spiritually bankrupt on a lot of levels.
Yeah.
Like I didn't have a relationship. I thought I had a relationship with God, but it wasn't the same relationship I have today. Today that relationship is deep and abiding and there's a lot more going on, but when I initially thought I had a relationship with the God of my understanding, it was, foxhole prayers.
Mm,
And, my life consisted of, please don't let me drink today, God, on the way to the liquor store,
right.
and it was and so what happened for me was I had a complete surrender, and I did have medical issues, and at first they didn't stop me, but I know that you have
Mm,
something much more dramatic, and I definitely want you to tell our audience about that, because that was one reason I asked you to come on this podcast, because this is some deadly serious stuff, and you are a testament to someone who said, okay, I'm ready.
yeah.
So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about
Oh,
how you did get sober.
of course. I mean, yeah, going back to that moment of surrender and the fear of death I talked about. I mean, like I said, I was a heroin addict. I was a crack user, but so I shot heroin every day, several times a day, and the event that really pushed me to get there, I'd overdosed before, um, a couple times over the years, and that for whatever reason wasn't enough. I'd seen friends die, and that wasn't enough. But I got to a point where I was just totally miserable, and what happened was I was working at the time, despite my addiction. I managed to hold down a job most of the time over the years, and I was working, but I had spent all my money, pretty early in the sort of pay cycle. We got paid every 2 weeks. I spent all my money, and by the second week, it was usually a scramble to try and scheme and make money. But so I spent all my money, and I needed some heroin because I was getting sick, heroin withdrawal, opiate withdrawal, and the way that heroin addicts use heroin when you shoot it, you use a little piece of cotton to filter the heroin. You draw it up through a syringe. First, you put a little water in with the heroin, you mix it up in like a bottle cap or a little, kind of confined space, and then you put a little piece of cotton in there to filter it up, and you draw the heroin, liquid mixture up into your syringe, and a little bit of residue is left in the cotton. That, is what they call it, cottons. And so after you do your shot, do your, get high, you have cotton left over, and if you save them up, you can sprinkle a little water over them, kind of mash them up, and get like a little kind of sludgy sort of residue that you can draw up and get a high with that when you're out of money, or out of heroin. Um, and so I had quite a few cottons, like probably a couple dozen at the time. And I'd left them out kind of damp in the July heat, and it was very hot in the room I left them out in. And I came home from work, and I was, sick. I was like, I need to shop. I don't have any money. I can't, my dealer won't front me any today, so I did a cotton shot. But because I'd left those damp cottons out in the humid sort of heat all day, they'd grown all kinds of, bacteria, and I mean, just formed a little like petri dish type of situation there. And so when I shot up, I managed to infect myself with a pretty intense, kind of quickly acting bacterial infection that became a blood infection. And so by, I don't know, midnight that night, I was throwing up. I couldn't stop throwing up. I kept throwing up. I started throwing up bile, and I had a high fever, and I was starting to hallucinate. And by the time I got to the emergency room, I couldn't feel my limbs, and I couldn't really think very well. And I was starting to, by the time they took me back, I could feel myself floating up out of my body, and I was kind of watching myself just sitting or laying there in the emergency room. And so I'm convinced that if I hadn't, if I'd gotten there a few hours later, I might not be here today. And if I hadn't gone at all, I definitely wouldn't be here today. Um, and that's kind of what did it. And being in the hospital for a few days while they treated the bacterial infection, I went through the worst of the withdrawal. And so by the time I got out, I had an opportunity, and I just felt like I have to try. I didn't actually have the confidence that I could be sober at the time, but like I said, I was terrified of dying after that, and I knew I couldn't go back to addiction. So I felt, let me at least try. Um, yeah, that's
Yeah,
kind of what did it for me.
that's really powerful. And what I really like about that, and I'm going to have to put a trigger warning on this. What I
Mm,
like is that you chose life.
yes.
Ultimately, there was something abiding in you, and you chose that. That thing that we are born with, that inner being, that source, that love. I call it God, but people have different names for it and different orientations. But there's something in you that wanted to live, and by the grace of whatever, God, universe, something, you got to live and you are able to carry this message. And
Yeah, I
it's a
mean,
message of hope, right? Because let's move on and talk about how it is because you're alive and it is because you chose life that you ended up in the business of helping other people in their recovery journey.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if I hadn't made that choice, I wouldn't be able to help other people who are in the process of maybe getting to that choice or making that choice, or maybe starting to think about making that choice. I mean, I think when you talked about that core identity before, whatever was in me, that divine spark, whatever
Mm-hmm.
was in me that wanted to live. I was just fortunate enough to have that, and for it to be, kind of reaching and grasping towards life. And I was fortunate enough to make that choice and to have people around me who could help me when I, you know, got there because I think sort of one of the basic, fundamentals of recovery is that you really can't do it alone, that you need help.
Yes.
At least in the way I, subscribe to recovery, that
I
is very
haven't
basic.
met anyone who could do it alone. I
Yeah.
honestly haven't. Maybe that person is out there somewhere, but I have not met them. We have 12-step programs. AA was founded in 1935, and then a plethora of 12-step programs have come as a result of AA, of one drunk talking to another, one guy realizing he couldn't do it alone and he couldn't keep it to himself, and that he couldn't stay sober unless he gave it away. And it's not a moral failing. You are not a bad person.
Mhm.
This is really, it may be a disease, it may be a disorder. If it's in the DSM, it's a disorder. But however you want to refer to it, it acts on us mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. And going back to the word choice, because you and I have been
Mm,
talking about the word choice a lot, we do have a choice. We just didn't know we had a choice for
right.
a very long time. But at some point, something snapped and you realized you had a choice. And I think I realized I had a choice when I surrendered my will.
Mm,
And the choice then becomes, do I want this more than the life I was living, the life where I
yes.
was looking for the next high or the next whatever, or, scouring my drawers for, loose change or borrowing money or stealing or doing whatever people do when they're trying to get something that they really think they need.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think it's a choice that you make really on a daily basis, ultimately. Yeah, you do have that choice. It's hard to see when you're in, the thick of it, when you're in, the
Mm-hmm.
depths of addiction. But what that kind of like near-death experience gave me was an opportunity to sort of clear the smoke a little bit and allow me to realize, I have that choice. And initially, it was fear that got me sober, but it was the new life and the hope that I was able to live in that kept me sober.
Right.
That's that message of hope that I think
Yeah.
is so basic to recovery is that if you make that choice, your life will get better. Yeah.
Yes, and I'm here to reinforce that point. Your life will get better, and it may not seem so at first. And the other thing, Atticus, life is going to continue to happen. Challenges are going to continue to come up. Things are going to happen that derail your plans, or so and so, hurt you, or you lost this, or whatever happened. But when you make a choice to handle it sober, you do so much better. For instance, this is a podcast on emotional intelligence, and the idea is that we have that inner sage, we have the inner source, and that source is the five powers are empathy. And the first person that we should all have empathy with is ourselves, right? And that
Yeah.
becomes that part of that self love and self regard. And that's if you want to call that selfish, that's fine because that's a good
Mm,
kind of selfish. That's not excluding anyone else from,
right.
feeling empathy. But if we can't begin to love that self and honor that self, then how can we possibly honor other people?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I hear again and again repeatedly working with people, in active alcoholism and active addiction and, maybe looking for recovery is I always think about other people, but I never think about myself. I
Mm-hmm.
try to be a good person to other people, but I'm not a good person to myself. And I mean, addiction, it really boiled down to, it's sort of fundamental problem is that you're terrible to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You're not good to yourself. I think I used to think of addiction as a parasite, which colonizes your that true, genuine core self and replaces your needs and desires with its own. Um, and so, yeah, you don't have that emotional intelligence to take care of yourself. But
Right.
yeah.
And then if you can get emotional intelligence, and by get it, I mean it's a muscle that we have to exercise. Our brain is made up of all of these neural networks, and the addiction has created different pathways that we go down, and our problems are solved by getting high again or whatever. And we have to create new neural pathways, and that involves choice. And it involves thinking differently. You have to choose to think
Mm,
differently. So you
yeah.
have to reframe every experience isn't this is bad, this happened to me. What am I going to do now? It's okay. I have a situation on my hands. How can I respond to this? And that involves exploring, what's going on? Where did this come from? Did I bring it about? Is there anything I can do differently? Do I need to call on somebody to ask for help? Do I need to how do I navigate? Another sage power is navigate. So
Mm,
I was talking with somebody else earlier, another podcast guest actually, and navigating is about asking your older self, what would you tell my young self today about this
mm,
thing? What do I need to
mhm.
know? And if you can kind of inhabit that older self, you will find that you actually have more wisdom than you think.
Yes. Yeah. No,
So
yeah.
explore, navigate, and then and have empathy and really take action on whatever you're learning. And one of them is innovate. And so innovate means think outside the box or go to plan B and maybe plan C.
Yeah, I mean, that you're so right about the it's not just, um it is about changing your type of thinking, your style of thinking, and that's something you have to work on and exercise every day. Um, because I obviously a lot of people that deal with addiction, um, they have a very negative cast of mind, which
Mm-hmm.
isn't particularly surprising, when you've lived that sort of life for many, many years. But if you carry that type of thinking over into sobriety, into recovery, you're going to set yourself up for a catastrophe down the road sooner or later. And so you have to really work at that because that's the only, way that you've known how to think. But you have to you have to start seeing the world in a different way because you want to, experience life in a different way. Obviously, you have to think differently, you have to act differently than what you've done before. Um, and so, I mean, I think going back to the idea of sort of selfishness, that sort of like taking care of yourself is a good kind of selfishness.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of addicts are obviously like unintentionally, but definitely self-centered because they're all about their addiction. They're all about their alcoholism. They're all about,
Mm-hmm.
the next drink or the next high. And that's obviously a very sort of self-centered way to live. Um, and so you have to escape from that very narrow, the very narrow confines of that. You talk about innovation and navigation, being able to see that the world is bigger than just your your addiction and your phobias and your, various, little moments of frustration and anger and irritation, and that you can move beyond that into a much brighter and wide open world.
Right, right. And I was, while you were talking, I always have like 100 things going through my head. And what came up for me while you were talking about that is, the thinking differently and reorienting, because you can be what some people would say, you can be dry, but you're not sober. You can be off substances, but if you haven't really changed your thinking and you aren't living differently, thinking differently, and behaving differently, and repairing relationships and nourishing new ones, then ultimately, what kind of life is that?
Right. What was the point of getting sober in the first place if you're
Hmm.
just gonna live the same way without the drink or the drug? Yeah, I mean, to me, like I've said, what has kept me sober is the opportunity to think differently and to live differently. And I think if I had just stayed the same person I was, I probably would have been back on heroin, within a year or so if I had just kept, and obviously it's not easy because it doesn't come naturally to you after years of addiction.
Hmm.
Like you said, it's something you have to really work at. But to me, that's the whole point of recovery is to be able to start to think differently and to live differently. And if you don't want to make the choice to kind of take that opportunity and to try and, inevitably you're gonna fail at things, you're not gonna succeed all the time, obviously. Life happens, like you said, but um trying to keep going in a sort of positive direction. That's the opportunity I think that recovery gives us every day.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a new life. It really is. And just to repeat, nobody said it was going to be easy peasy,
Right.
but I think you and I agree that it is better, better, better.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
1,000
So,
times. Yeah.
yeah. So it may not be easy to change your thinking. It isn't going to happen overnight. It is, as I say in this podcast, we have basically a positive intelligence or emotional intelligence muscle, and it needs to go to the gym. We have to
Mm,
exercise the muscle every day. And that involves, for me, meditation and prayer, and it involves gratitude. I'm always thinking about what am I grateful for. And as I was telling a friend yesterday, sometimes we get AFGOs, another effing growth opportunity. But because I can say it like that, I can accept it. Like, oh, okay, here, I guess I needed to learn that. Or what
right.
is this situation teaching me right now? Or what is it that I need to learn from this? And if I can call it an AFGO, I'm much more likely to maybe take in what it is that I need to learn versus, oh, this is terrible. Look what this thing happened. But as soon as it's an AFGO, it's like, yep, there we go again.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can gives you the opportunity to learn from life rather than to just suffer through and endure it. Yeah.
Right. And yeah, I'm here to say that the world is actually a good place. Yes, there are bad things happening in the world, and yes, there are problems. And yes, we need to do things about them. We need to take action. But that's why emotional intelligence is so important. It's how can we reorient ourselves and to each other and to the world at large so that we can make it a better place and so that we can fight addiction on all fronts because there's this dry January. This episode is kind of coming at the very end of January, but
Mm,
and dry January is a great step in the right direction, but it is really just a pebble. It's not what real sobriety is. There's something
right.
about staying dry and maybe swearing off it for a month and seeing how things go. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to live differently. It means you're dry for January. And it's a good start. I don't want to knock dry January, but I do want to say that it goes much deeper than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and personally, I mean, I think I'm still just at the beginning of getting to know myself as a person,
Hmm.
um, because it's a lifelong process. But like you said, the world, if you think of it as a bad place, you're not going to have a good time in life. You're going
Hmm.
to have a bad time because you're living in a bad place. That's how you think of it. That's what it's going to be to you. But I mean, I like to remind myself, you talk about gratitude, just how amazing it is to be able to be alive, at this time, on this planet, in this
Hmm.
universe. Like, it's just, it's not something you should take for granted, I don't think. Being able to wake up every day and experience the world. You only have one life, and I would like to be able to live it in a way that makes me happy.
And I think that boils over into other things, right? Because if you're happy and you're grounded and you're able to sort of take life with a grain of salt, that's going to spill over into your interactions with other people. And it makes you a more effective recovery coach, too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah,
So this was a bit of a sober podcast, but I hope everyone gets the message that this is really about there's hope, that addiction is terrible and it's horrible and it can really wreck your life. And maybe it already has on some level if you're watching or listening to this, but it doesn't have to stay that way. And there's help out there, and all of that help will be in the show notes. But ultimately, Atticus and I want to tell you that life is good and it is so much better sober than under the influence.
yeah, 1,000 times, definitely. And you can change your life, I think is sort of the message there.
Yeah, I think, doesn't that say that there, change your mind, change your life?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it is. And so, Atticus, this is a good place for us to wrap up. And you mentioned a song that resonates with you. And I thought I would play it for our audience.
I guess you're just what I needed. Just what I needed. I needed someone to feed. I guess you're just what I needed. Just what I needed. I needed someone to please.
And that is our show. Thank you so much for tuning in. And remember, please like and subscribe to this podcast. And if you think you want to work with a recovery coach, I'm available. Atticus is available. And we are here to help you. We just want to show you that there is a way out of addiction that is above and beyond your wildest dreams. So thanks, everybody. And I'll see you at the Emotional Intelligence or EQ Gym. Bye.